What am I? Each of you asks himself. An abyss of lawless and unregulated impulses, desires, wishes, passions, a chaos without light or guiding star. How am I to obtain a correct answer if, without regard to God's commandments, or to the duties to which morality prescribes, without regard to the voice of reason, which, in the course of history, after bitter experiences, has exalted the best and most reasonable thing into law, I simply appeal to myself. On July 20th, 2020, the gaming community received its first clear look at the upcoming title Shin Megami Tensei V via a new trailer. This teaser starts off strong, showing a cutscene featuring the demon lord Lucifer boldly proclaiming the god you worship is dead. Now, this wasn't something totally out of bounds in previous mainline SMT games. The Abrahamic God is referenced in many of those games. In some of them, you can even kill him yourself, but still, he's presented as a pretty strong guy. Among some fans, he's even considered the final boss of the entire MegaTen franchise. While I don't think that's the intent, there is something to be said about his prominence in the series to make someone think that in the first place. I mean, of course, he is God, right? So why is he not around now in SMT5? This must have been a deliberate choice by ATLUS, but what does it mean for the game's narrative? How can we make sense of the world of Shin Megami Tensei without God? To begin with, first we have to explain some basic Megami Tensei concepts. If any of this section interests you, I have a full video discussing all of this in depth, titled Shin Megami Tensei Beyond Good and Evil. But here, we are only going to cover the basics. Demons in SMT are physical manifestations of humankind's thoughts and ideas. In SMT4 Apocalypse, this is referred to as observation, but some version of this concept has implicitly been around the series since the start. It's a reference to the historical developments of religion, where someone, let's say in ancient Greek, saw a thunderbolt in the sky and said, hey, there has to be a guy up there throwing that. This is to say, religion and philosophy are the way people register reality around them. The personification of nature here is made literal. Now, of course, religion would go on to evolve alongside human culture, becoming intertwined with our social constructs, most importantly, our understandings of good and evil. This brings us to the idea of God. Broadly speaking, in Christianity, God acts as the objective basis for morality, while humans are seen as inherently flawed actors. The only metric for how good any action can be is in its proximity to God. Anything God approves of is good by virtue of his approval. This informs how acts in SMT. He wants to be viewed as the linchpin holding together civilized society. However, in the same way humans give gods their authority, we can take it away. When public support of a god, or rather, the idea they represent, wanes, their power does as well. ATLUS games work on the notion that, over time, human society will naturally shift back and forth between extremes. When one side grows too strong, the other is empowered, causing a ripple effect that manifests the corresponding demons in the human world. In this sense, demons are a metaphor for karma, being the direct result of the beliefs and actions of human society at large. This means that as long as humans perceive reality as they do today, they are irrevocably chained together with demons in a symbiotic relationship. All of this is alluded to in the final boss dialogue from SMT2, where says,
"Think ye that ye shall be able to find your way without the help of my unseen hand? Remember well, humans can live with nothing to trust or rely on, but humans are not strong. Every time humans shall seek my help, the great will of the universe shall bring me forth countless times."
ATLUS believes that humankind will eventually gravitate towards a system that can stabilize their lives, which, in their games, is symbolized by God. This also speaks to one of ATLUS's chief concerns that can be seen broadly across the entire Megami Tensei franchise: authoritarianism and humanity's predilection towards security over social freedoms. It's not just that these are inevitable due to the shifts in human nature, it's that ATLUS thinks these are very prevalent problems being faced currently. These are issues that need to be solved right now. This is why so many MegaTen games have some analog of the Abrahamic God as their antagonist. Take, for example, one of ATLUS's most recent titles, Soul Hackers 2, where the villain is meant to represent the Gnostic Ions as a critique of authoritarianism, arguing that it takes away the social aspects that define humankind. The game goes further and explicitly describes the state of its society, saying,
The current era is defined by unchecked capitalism, rampant materialism, and a total lack of intellectual curiosity. All forms of societal growth, whether cultural, economical, or technological, have fallen into stagnant stasis. The populace can only blithely await a great innovation to end their collective ennui.
For those who don't know what ennui means, it refers to a sense of irritating boredom and has a connotation of the subject being jaded. Now, it's important to note that while SH2 is obviously in the future, the social critique that defines the cyberpunk genre works by projecting amplified versions of our modern social issues into a theoretical future to force us to question the path our society is going. These issues don't exist in a vacuum. In fact, these critiques of materialism originated from the first Soul Hackers, with its use of Native American religion, and was likewise referenced in Nocturne as Yuko Takao's motivation to start the conception, destroying the world to create anew. I believe this was a key aspect of what Kazunara Yamai was referring to when he talked about trying to empathize with modern feelings in SMT5. He specifically mentions issues like unemployment and the looming threat of nuclear warfare, and all of these factors come together to form an existential crisis. There is a certain sense of dread that hangs like a cloud over modern society, the sinking feeling that you, as an individual, have very little agency over your own life. That forces you to begin to question how the world is structured around you, how you fit into it, and why that's the case. This lack of faith in your community's social systems, in turn, breeds a sense of nihilism. This is subtly referenced in SMT5 itself, at the start of the game. It opens with a quote from the Manyoshu, a collection of Japanese poems that reads, "When I contemplate the brevity of man's life, I am indifferent to worldly things. How many are the days I spend in thought?" For a more in-depth look at this thought process, let's take a Yamai interview for SMT4 Apocalypse. He says,
As human civilization develops, people end up wanting to live without being bound to anything. But on the other hand, there's also the fragile future which makes us wonder whether humans can actually live independently.
This goes back to the dialogue from earlier. Even though we, as humans, can recognize the harm caused by the powers that be, there's often still a certain comfort in the structure they provide. Not just for physical or financial security, but also in an emotional and psychological sense. It's reassuring to know that everything around you is happening for a reason. That even when your life is crashing down around you, it doesn't matter, because good always prevails over evil. Normally, this role in society is played by religion and superstition. For instance, let's take a look at apocalyptic scripture. It developed during a time when the ancient Jews were under foreign rule, and they needed some way to justify what was happening in their minds. The solution came in the form of a prophecy for the Messiah, a future king who would break their chains and rule the land in peace. However, the Jews' situation seemed to never get better. It may have started with the Babylonians, but then it was the Persians, and then the Greeks, and finally the Romans. All of this occurred over hundreds of years. Generations lived and died, all under subjugation. This would lead to an evolution of their scripture. There wasn't just a Messiah now. Behind the scenes, there was an unseen spiritual world, where the forces of good and evil were fighting over the very souls of mankind. So don't worry, God will win. You just can't see it right now. However, in the modern world, things aren't so simple. It's a fairly commonly known fact that, around the world, religiosity is dropping. With rising education rates, it's becoming harder and harder for many people to justify their belief in the supernatural. If we can't put our faith in any of the systems meant to help us, what are we supposed to do? One philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche's answer to this, was found in his adage, "God is dead." He believed that the aforementioned sense of nihilism was an inevitable result of the Enlightenment era, which furthered the importance of rationalism and empiricism in academia. For example, one of its most foremost thinkers was Immanuel Kant, who was nicknamed the All-Crusher for his work delegitimizing metaphysics. He essentially argued that nothing could be said about concepts that would theoretically be outside of the range of human perception, since there's no way to quantify that. This created a clear split between philosophy and theology. Nietzsche believed that this distinction between the natural and the supernatural was slowly causing a domino effect, which, in his own words, would render God unworthy of belief. As the realization spread, it would shatter people's understanding of reality. If God is meant to be the objective basis for morality, His non-existence means all of the concepts that presuppose him come crumbling down. This doesn't just mean good and evil, but also Christianity's focus on the soul and the afterlife. Without the spiritual nature of sin and salvation, there's no real impetus to follow the religion's rules. It becomes an arbitrary moral code. If you don't believe in heaven, there's no quote-unquote objective reason to give to the poor, and likewise, no objective reason not to commit murder because there's no hell. And again, it's terrifying to think that there's no real basis to anything you're doing, even more so when you consider that this is the moral foundation of your entire society, which is now null and void. This is the symbolic meaning behind the death of the creator in SMT5, and the key theme of the game as a whole. What do you do when God is dead? This is actually directly alluded to in the aforementioned trailer for SMT5, where Lucifer said, "The God you worship is dead." He continues, saying,
"Order itself has crumbled, and chaos shall reign over all. And within the throes of chaos, the world can be reborn, a future yet unknown. In a world without its creator, which path shall you choose?"
Here, Lucifer is referring to the alignment cycle. Across the mainline SMT series, there is a shared theme of an eternal battle between the forces of law and chaos. Since gods and demons are created from mankind's thoughts, they work to represent political extremes that the public switches back and forth between. In SMT5, this is represented physically through the throne of creation. For those who don't remember, Prime Minister Koshimizu explains it like so.
Ever since time out of mind, the gods would do battle for the right to rule the world. Before the Creator reigned supreme, the throne belonged to Baal, god of the harvest. And even before that, it was held by Ra, the sun god. Every god who assumes the throne obtains its vast power, enough to reshape the world however they see fit. As such, many a god has fallen in pursuit of that power. The throne of creation exists to prove one's dominion over the earth. Whoever assumes the throne may determine the world's laws and inner workings, much like how the Creator established his own order.
We can understand the demon who occupies this throne as a metaphor for the current ruling social paradigm. These are the set of values held by society at large, and in 5, the world can literally be created in their image. Now, if you're familiar with SMT, you may know that the destruction and recreation of Tokyo is a mainstay in the series. It's meant to represent how, across history, Tokyo has been a focal point of social change. This is related back into the series' depiction of the cycle, and identified with the Hindu cycle of creation, maintenance, and destruction, where the destruction of the old is not only natural, but necessary for the creation of the new. However, in the game's plot, we find that the throne is actually unoccupied. It stresses the fact that Lucifer didn't take the throne from he just killed him. Here we find the cycle incomplete, with no god to recreate the world. This has left Tokyo stagnant and decaying, which brings us to the game's main conflict. 18 years earlier, an event called the Conception occurred in Tokyo that turned the city into a demonic realm called the Da'at, which separated Tokyo from the real world. With the city now crawling with demons, the creator tried to save the town by fabricating an illusory Tokyo called the Shekinah Glory as a replacement. However, with dead, his glory is quickly fading, and Da'at is beginning to encroach on the real world. Now, Shekinah is a real concept in Judaism which means dwelling, and refers to the manifestation of God on earth. So we can understand the Shekinah Glory in SMT5 as a metaphor for the effect that God, in his absence, is still having on the world. He may no longer be around, but his lingering presence is still felt, and something has to be done. If nothing changes, his glory will eventually fade, and the world will be consumed by chaos. In this sense, the setting of SMT5 is filled with walking zombies. The dead are still having a very tangible effect on the world, while the living are unable to move forward. This is made most clear with the group Bethel, that clings to an old order and continues to fight a war that was already lost nearly 2 decades ago. Similarly, over the course of the game, we see the world subject itself to rules that aren't even being enforced anymore, like the condemnation. Originally, this was a rule set up by the creator that stripped every other god of their knowledge. This transformed them from Nahobino into demons, disallowing them from taking the throne. Then, after he died, the condemnation became null and void, allowing those demons to regain their true forms as gods if they came in contact with their knowledge. However, because they don't know is dead, people continue to follow the rules that he set, even though they aren't in play. All of this was meant to be a metaphor for the state of being Nietzsche described as the source of nihilism. He believed people would become distressed and unable to move forward, while their whole worldview collapsed in front of their very eyes. However, his solution was not to rely on the structures that previously gave us confidence in society. Nietzsche viewed many of those structures as less of a guide and more of a prison that largely served to hold us back. He believed that their removal opened up a new opportunity for people to define their future on their own terms. He talks about this in his book, The Gay Science, saying, "Finally, the horizon seems clear again, even if not bright. Finally, our ships may set out again, set out to face any danger. Every daring of the lover of knowledge is allowed again. The sea, our sea, lies open again. Maybe there has never been such an open sea." In the place of the old dogma, Nietzsche argued for what he called the philosophy of the future, which he saw as being defined by the will to power. This is the idea that the strongest motivation behind the actions of all living things is an unconscious desire to obtain more power. Now, the full meaning and context of this concept is heavily debated by scholars. However, one opinion is that this power isn't necessarily about domination over others, but rather control over one's environment, so as to promote self-improvement and one's own living conditions. In Shin Megami Tensei, these ideas are normally expressed through the series' neutral alignment. Neutral's defining feature is its opposition to both law and chaos, which are generally represented by religious groups led by their gods. In this sense, we can see Neutral's support of humanity as a rejection of supernatural thinking, and its freedom defined through rejection of rule by gods. This ties into the series' depiction of the cycle, wherein law and chaos are political extremes. Here, Neutral acts as a centrist position that needs to be followed in order for society to progress. Stephen explains it simply in SMT2 GBA's 18th visionary item, Silver Necktie Pin, saying,
"People advance by hanging onto a subtle balance. Maybe it would be best to say that they need to achieve balance to advance in the first place."
This theme is later echoed as the logic behind Yakumo's ideology. He believes that neither angels nor demons care about the well-being of the citizens of Tokyo and only seek to abuse them. Even the ones who claim to be well-meaning often disregard the harm caused to locals caught in the middle of the war between law and chaos. This doubly works to show that the ideas these demons represent can become so extreme that their theoretical ideological views become more important than tangible effects to humankind. This is why Yakumo's end goal is to destroy the throne of creation. Even though gods are creating structure for the world, Yakumo believes that that structure would ultimately be on some level faulty, precisely due to having been defined by gods. Even though our social structures are created by us humans, once established, they can, in turn, define us in a feedback loop. A similar theme can be seen in the true humanity or true neutral ending, where rather than destroying the throne, the goal becomes removing demons from the human world entirely. This is an issue because, again, demons are karma, the direct results of the actions of human society. Under normal circumstances, as long as humans keep doing things, demons will always return to the earth. This is where Lucifer comes in. At the end of the game, once all of the other Nahobino have been defeated, he introduces the concept of the mandala system and explains it like so.
Following the world's recreation, a new dot will eventually appear, and soon after, the gods will rise up to claim the throne. Battle after battle, you sought to purge demons from this world, but they will come slithering back, as they always do.
While he doesn't explain how, by killing him and consuming his knowledge, the Nahobino will be able to free the world from the mandala system. Logically speaking, it would make sense that if there was no one able to take the throne from you, the cycle would be halted. Lucifer's role here appears to have been inspired by his previous depiction in SMT Nocturne's destruction route. also known as True Demon Ending. In it, the demi-fiend is tasked by Lucifer to destroy Kagatsuchi, the cosmic egg that would have birthed the new world. Similar to Da'at in SMT5, Nocturne frames the Vortex world as part of an eternal cycle where the world is destroyed and a new one is created based on someone's reason. While not explicitly explained, the game alludes to Lucifer's motivation being based around the idea that the cycle removes the autonomy of both humans and demons, and is forced onto them by the Great Will. Here, through juxtaposition with Lucifer, the Great Will is equated to the Christian God, and likewise, represents the basis of reality and structure in the universe. This depiction makes more sense when we consider the thematic context behind Nocturne's reasons. In Japanese, the word used is kotowari, but can also be read as ri or li. This refers to a Neo-Confucian philosophical concept by the same name, which can be translated as principle, rationality, or coherence. Simply put, it's an idea similar to natural law, in that it refers to patterns in the universe that define how objects, either physical or social, function internally and interact with their environment externally. For an easy example, the coherence of the number 2 is how both 1 + 1 = 2 and 2 + 3 = 5. In this sense, we can view the reasons as not just a social ideology, but a worldview in a more literal sense. They are a blueprint that would directly define the metaphysical rules of a new world. So all of this ties back into the idea of social structures as restrictive, and that we as a society need to be able to move beyond them. The idea that laws are just by virtue of being tradition, or even worse, that they justify themselves, is entirely reductive. This isn't to say that these structures existing at all is a bad thing. After all, concepts like names are social constructs, and those are very evidently useful. We just need to be vigilant in gauging something's utility versus the harm it can or already is causing. If we're not careful, we too can become led around by laws written by biased people who had no way to foresee the future, and those rules may become our very own modern gods. We need to be ready to step forward and take a bite from the forbidden fruit. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil."